With the prospects of a Democratic victory appearing increasingly more unlikely, Democrats are bracing not just for a Trump victory in 2024, but potentially a Trump landslide. And that's something we're going to get into a little bit more as we get on through the video. But Democrats have really put themselves in this position with Joe Biden as their nominee back in 2020, who already was sort of showing signs of cognitive impairment and just age-related decline. And of course, this time around, with the debate that we saw back in June, it was very apparent that Joe Biden has certainly lost a step or two. And as a result, many Democrats from behind the scenes, Barack Obama, Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, even Adam Schiff today, have all called on Joe Biden to step aside as the Democratic nominee and make way for somebody younger and potentially more electable. Because as it stands today, Joe Biden is probably the Democrat that would lose to Donald Trump in 2024. I think Trump's prospects are better with Joe Biden as the nominee because he already has the baggage and unpopularity that Republicans can use against him. So we're going to get into the state of the race as it stands just a little over 100 days before Election Day and where these numbers are coming from that Democrats could potentially face a complete wipeout, not just on the presidential level, but now you have Hakeem Jeffries and others saying that Democrats could lose the House by a wider margin and lose the Senate as well. So we're going to get to all of that in just a second. But first, if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing down below and liking this video if you enjoy. So CNN did this graphic where essentially where the polls have this race as of right now, Donald Trump is at 330 electoral votes to Joe Biden's just 208. And if you notice on this map, states like Virginia are lean red, states like New Hampshire are flipping Republican, and even states like Maine at large are going Republican. And you have places like Colorado, New Mexico, Minnesota, and Oregon all in the lighter blue category. So this would be apocalyptic for Democrats in 2024 if this was to come to fruition. Now, at this point in time, I don't think the Democrat situation is that dire, but I will say that I think Democrats are on track to lose. If we take a look at Joe Biden's presidential approval rating, he currently stands at a negative 21-point deficit in terms of favorability. That is pretty disastrous when you're standing for re-election. And if we take a look at how these numbers break down in key swing states, Nevada, for example, Joe Biden is underwater by 24 points. Arizona, he's under by 28. Pennsylvania, 24. Michigan, 24. Wisconsin, 8. North Carolina, 21. Virginia, 16. Georgia, 27. So these numbers are absolutely abysmal, and this is why Democrats are panicking. Not only is Joe Biden unpopular, and these numbers really haven't changed a whole lot over the past few months. I know we covered Joe Biden's national favorabilities in a video a few months ago, but I think now the situation is becoming more dire because Joe Biden has shown himself publicly in front of millions of people to certainly have lost a step, and I think you've seen a swing in Trump's favor in a lot of the battlegrounds after the debate. Now, there was that attempt on Trump's life at a rally in Pennsylvania back on Saturday. That really hasn't moved the polls a lot at all, and I think that's mainly because Democrats, Republicans, and independents have universally condemned political violence. But I think the debate really has swung the polls, and that's something Democrats are really panicking about because I think they know a lot more behind the scenes than they're letting on, and I would suspect that Joe Biden's cognitive decline behind the scenes is a lot worse than what we see publicly, and that's why Democrats know that Joe Biden is the weakest candidate to go up against Donald Trump. The only thing he has going for him at this point in time is incumbency, and that's one of the reasons why in previous election predictions I've done months ago, I had Joe Biden as a narrow favorite because he is somebody who is an incumbent, and he has shown to string together a diverse coalition that's necessary to win the states required to get to 270. Now I think it's very unlikely that Joe Biden is able to do this. I would say, however, I don't think this election is going to be a layup for Donald Trump by any means. I think a lot of Democrats and even independents are perfectly content with voting for Joe Biden, despite all of the health concerns, mainly because of the fact that they're voting for his policies and voting against Donald Trump rather than for Joe Biden. But the fact that Joe Biden's approval rating is only positive in 4 states across the country is incredibly alarming for Democrats. Barack Obama in the lead up to 2012 was nowhere near this unpopular. In fact, his favorability was at 47%, and a lot of political pundits at that point in time thought that number was too low to win re-election. So now we're at a point where Joe Biden's approval rating stands at just 36%. And even in states, if we go to the battlegrounds real quick, if we take a look at the general election, Trump beats Joe Biden by 2.5%, 47.3 to 44.8. At this point in time in 2016, Hillary Clinton was beating Trump by 3 points. Biden was beating Trump by 8.6. So if we take a look at the battleground states real quick, Arizona, Donald Trump leads Biden by 5.7%. In the state of Nevada, Donald Trump leads Biden by 5. Wisconsin, Donald Trump leads Biden by 3. This number was tied just a few weeks ago, so the polls in Wisconsin have dramatically shifted in Donald Trump's favor. And I think part of that is because you have the RNC being hosted there as of right now. And I think also it's just due to the fact that Trump has been surging everywhere across the country, not just in the battlegrounds, but also even in blue states, as we're going to talk about. Michigan, Donald Trump is above Biden by 1.3. Pennsylvania, 4.5. Now, this actually sort of lines up with what we saw back in 2016, because in 2016, out of the 3 swing Rust Belt states, this time around, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania gave Donald Trump the largest margin of victory. And again, it was only a 0.7% margin of victory, but nonetheless, it would make the most sense that Pennsylvania, out of these 3 states, is polling the best for Donald Trump. Now, Wisconsin was incredibly close as well, an identical 0.7 margin. Michigan was the closest of all of these, and the polls sort of backed that up this time around. I think the only thing that sort of switched is that Wisconsin, you would expect, based on 2020, would be more in Donald Trump's favor, but now we're starting to see more of a 2016 type of political landscape when it comes to this. Now, if we look at North Carolina, Donald Trump beats Biden 47 to 41.6. And finally, in Georgia, Donald Trump beats Joe Biden by 3.9. So the polls have swung a little bit. Georgia's gotten a little bit more Democratic, I think, in the polls. Same with North Carolina. Pennsylvania's gotten redder. Wisconsin's gotten redder. Michigan has gotten redder. Nevada has gotten redder. And Arizona's been about stagnant. So that's really the state of the battlegrounds. Interestingly enough, and we'll talk about this in tomorrow's video, along with the Pennsylvania poll, Virginia has a dead heat between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Both candidates at 43.5%. So that's why you get this electoral map, because the polls have continually showed that Donald Trump is surprisingly competitive in this state, which I think speaks to a broader problem for Democrats in that they're losing ground in states that they've taken for granted. Again, Virginia was a Biden plus 10 state. If we look at Michigan, it was a Biden plus 2.8 state. Donald Trump now leads there. Wisconsin was incredibly close. Trump is up by 3. Pennsylvania was a 1.2 margin for Joe Biden. He's underwater there by 4 points. So really all Donald Trump needs is the Rust Belt, as we talked about. Just one of the Rust Belt states, or Virginia, would give Donald Trump a second term in office. Now, I think a situation where you have Virginia narrowly flipping and the Rust Belt staying Democratic is incredibly, incredibly unlikely. But for whatever reason, the polls in Virginia have the state swinging a lot more in the Republican direction than these other Rust Belt states. Again, Joe Biden won this state by 10, and the polls have it at a dead heat. I want to squeeze in the caveat that we only have 4 polls in this aggregate. You know, if you take a look at Georgia, for instance, there are many more polls that go into the average here. Virginia has not been polled nearly as much as some of these other states, and that's because up until a few months ago, it was seen as non-competitive. And Virginia really hasn't been realistically competitive since 2016. So in 2020, Donald Trump really didn't put any effort into the state, neither did Joe Biden. This time around, it looks like there may have to be more attention in Virginia, because in Virginia, it's not just about the presidential election result at the top of the ticket, but also down ballot House races. And a couple of those seats, Virginia 2nd, Virginia 7th, are incredibly close and could ultimately decide the balance of power in the House. So all of these polls are really, really bad news for Joe Biden. I think over 70% of Democrats have said that Joe Biden doesn't have the stamina and cognitive function to be president for another 4 years. So again, if you're the Democrats, you're essentially stuck with Joe Biden, who's been very stubborn throughout this whole process. Because when you think back to Democrats that knew they were going to lose re-election, Lyndon Johnson, for example, they stepped aside. And Joe Biden, I think, either because of his own ego or because he's just genuinely unaware, hasn't made this decision. And Joe Biden and Hunter Biden behind the scenes are Joe's biggest supporters. A lot of the people on the Biden team essentially feel doomed and feel that this election has no chance of giving them victory. So you've seen all these leaks come out from out the White House, basically reiterating that it's basically a lost cause for Joe Biden. Now, I'm not ready to make that assertion just yet. It looks very bad, but it's only July, and that's a political lifetime in politics from now until November. But you'd certainly rather be Donald Trump than Joe Biden at this point. I mean, Donald Trump, for all his flaws, for all his baggage, he just appears more capable and ready to meet the moment than somebody like Biden. Again, the country, by and large, does not like Joe Biden. He's underwater by over 20 points. 57% of Americans all across the country disapprove of Joe Biden, and only in 4 states do the majority or the plurality of residents actually approve of Joe Biden. There's very, very blue states, California, Washington, Rhode Island, Connecticut, that have very poor views of Joe Biden. So Biden can't even galvanize the base to have enthusiasm for him. Now, the only silver lining for him is that Donald Trump is his opponent, and Republicans, I think, sort of have fumbled when it comes to abortion rhetoric. So those 2 points might give Democrats a tiny bit of hope. But again, as of right now, I think Trump is running a much more effective campaign. The fact that you have so much disarray in the Democratic caucus, so many Democrats telling Joe Biden to stand down. And if Joe Biden stays in the race, Republicans are going to put on blast all these clips of all these high-profile Democrats saying that Joe Biden can't win, saying that he's not capable. And that's just going to make their election prospects even worse. So obviously at this point in time, you'd rather be the Republicans, but anything could happen between now and November. You could see a coup in the Democratic convention in August, potentially replace the president, although I don't know how likely that is at this point in time. But anyway, that's it for today's video. Please leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell notification so you miss any more videos I put out. As always, again, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.